The envelope landed on the table with a sound that felt heavier than paper should allow. Everyone stopped moving. The jazz playing softly from the kitchen speaker became something distant, almost imaginary. My daughter Grace looked at me with an expression I had not seen since her mother died. It was fear dressed as confusion. Across the polished mahogany, Daniel's father adjusted his reading glasses, folded his hands, and spoke 5 words that would unravel 3 years of carefully maintained silence. I believe we should discuss terms. That moment had actually started long before any of us sat down at that table. To understand what happened that evening, I need to take you back to a quieter time, back to the kind of life most people would never look at twice. My name is Thomas Arthur Grant. I am 68 years old. I live in a small house on Birchwood Lane in Hadley, Virginia. Population just under 4,000. My neighbors know me as the man who fixes screen doors and sharpens lawnmower blades for free. I drive a 1997 Chevrolet pickup with a dent in the tailgate that I never bothered repairing. My dog, a 12-year-old beagle named Chester, follows me everywhere, even to the hardware store where old Frank at the counter saves me the day-old coffee because he knows I prefer it slightly bitter. Every morning I wake before sunrise. I fry 2 eggs in the same cast-iron skillet my wife seasoned 29 years ago. I sit on the back porch and listen to the birds argue over the feeder. I read the newspaper, the real one, printed on paper that smells like ink, and yesterday. Nobody in Hadley knows what I did before I moved here. I served in the Army. That is what I tell people. Most assume I spent my years behind a desk. I let them imagine whatever they need to. The truth is, I retired from the United States Army after 38 years of active service as a 4-star general. I commanded divisions across 3 continents. My pension alone deposits more than $26,000 into my account every month. My investments, built carefully with my late wife Helen over decades, generate enough passive income that my grandchildren would never need to worry about money. Helen made certain of that before she got sick. Helen, even now, saying her name aloud makes the kitchen feel emptier than it already is. She died 7 years ago. Ovarian cancer. The kind that whispers at first and then screams so loud you cannot hear anything else. She fought it the way she fought everything, with grace, with stubbornness, with this quiet refusal to let anyone feel sorry for her. In those final months, she spent more time comforting me than the other way around. She had a saying. She repeated it so often that I can still hear her voice wrapping around each word like she was handing me something fragile. Thomas, the only people who need to tell you what they are worth have not figured out what they are worth yet. I did not understand that fully when she was alive. I thought it was clever. But she meant it as armor. She meant it as a compass. And in the years after she was gone, that sentence became the truest thing anyone had ever spoken to me. After Helen passed, the house became a museum of routines that no longer made sense. I still poured 2 cups of coffee every morning for 11 straight months before I caught myself doing it. I still reached across the bed at night. My hand would land on cold sheets and something inside my chest would collapse quietly, the way a sandcastle gives in when the tide comes. Silence from a room that used to hold laughter is a different kind of devastation. Eventually, I stopped trying to fill the emptiness. I learned to live beside it. I kept Helen's garden alive. I kept her books on the shelf exactly where she left them. And I kept her wisdom close, especially when it came to people. Grace was all I had left, my only daughter. She was 31 when she called me on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and told me she had met someone. His name is Daniel, she said. Her voice had that cautious brightness parents learn to recognize. The sound of someone hoping you will approve before they finish the sentence. Tell me about him. He is a developer, commercial properties, very successful. How did you meet? A fundraiser downtown. He bought the entire table just so his employees could attend for free. That detail impressed me. I will not pretend it did not. A month later, Grace brought Daniel to Hadley for a weekend visit. He arrived driving a dark blue sedan that looked like it cost more than my house. But his handshake was firm, his eye contact was steady. He carried a bottle of wine and a bag of peaches from a farm stand he had passed on the highway. I noticed you have a pie dish on the windowsill, he said. Thought maybe you bake? I do. He smiled. My grandmother made the best peach cobbler in South Carolina. Used to sneak me slices before dinner. Something softened in me when he said that. A man who remembers his grandmother's kitchen is a man with roots somewhere real. For the first year, I liked him without reservation. He treated Grace well. He remembered the anniversary of Helen's passing and sent flowers without being asked. He sat on my porch and threw a tennis ball for Chester until the old dog was too tired to fetch anymore. He laughed easily. He listened when I talked about Helen. I wanted it to work. Every widowed father holding on to his only daughter wants it to work. But something shifted. It did not happen in one moment. It happened the way rust happens, slowly, invisibly, until one day you notice the structure is not as strong as it used to be. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this one keep reaching people who need to hear them. The first sign came at Thanksgiving dinner at my house. Grace had cooked. She spent 2 full days preparing everything from scratch: cornbread stuffing, green bean casserole, a turkey she brined for 24 hours using Helen's recipe. The table looked beautiful. Candles, cloth napkins, the good plates. Daniel arrived late. He kissed Grace on the cheek and surveyed the table. He picked up a fork, examined it. Then he smiled and said, "Vintage silverware has a certain charm, does it not?" Grace laughed nervously. They were my mother's. He nodded. I can tell. My stomach tightened. Not because the words were cruel. They were not. But because charm can be a very precise instrument when someone knows how to aim it. The second sign came a few weeks later. Daniel and Grace were visiting for the weekend. We were sitting in my living room. Daniel looked around at the shelves, the old television, the rug Helen and I bought at an estate sale in 1992. He turned to Grace. "You know, your father would probably be more comfortable in one of those assisted living communities, the nice ones. They handle everything for you." Grace stiffened. Dad is 68. He does not need assisted living. Daniel raised his hands. I am not saying he does. I am saying he deserves to relax. He looked at me. "You have earned it, Thomas." The way he said my name made me feel like a project, not a person. I smiled and said nothing. Helen's words drifted through my mind. The only people who need to tell you what they are worth have not figured out what they are worth yet. The third sign came at a restaurant in the city. White tablecloths, a menu without prices. Our server was a young woman, maybe 22, clearly new. She brought the wrong appetizer. Before Grace or I could respond, Daniel flagged down the manager. His tone carried enough authority to make the young woman's eyes fill. I watched her hands shake as she carried the plate back. Grace touched his arm. She was new. Daniel shrugged. Standards exist for a reason. After dinner, I found the young server folding napkins near the kitchen door. Her name tag read Sophie. I placed a folded bill on her stack. "You did fine tonight." She looked at me. "Thank you. That means a lot." I nodded and walked back to the table before anyone noticed. You learn a great deal about someone by watching how they treat people who cannot do anything for them. The fourth sign was the quietest. Grace came to visit me alone one Saturday. She said Daniel was working. We sat on the porch drinking lemonade. Chester laid across her feet the way he always did. I noticed her left hand. She was wearing long sleeves in July. She pulled them down every time she reached for her glass. I did not ask. A father sometimes knows that asking too soon will close the door that patience might eventually open, but I noticed. I noticed the way she flinched when her phone buzzed. I noticed the way she checked the time every 20 minutes. I noticed the way she hugged me goodbye, holding on 3 seconds longer than usual, as if she were storing something she might need later. That night, I sat in Helen's chair and stared at the wall until the room went dark. Something inside me became perfectly still, the kind of still that a man learns only after decades of watching, waiting, and deciding when to act. I did not know it then, but that stillness was preparation. I had no idea that within 3 months, everything would change. The fifth sign removed all doubt. Grace had left her phone at my house. The phone rang while I was carrying it inside from the truck. The name displayed was not Daniel. It was a law firm, Harrison, Burke & Associates. I answered without thinking. A woman's voice responded. "This is Patricia calling from Harrison Burke. I am confirming the appointment regarding the prenuptial revision and asset protection filing for Mr. Daniel Reed." She paused. "Is this the Grant residence?" I set the phone down gently on the counter. The kitchen clock ticked. Chester looked up at me from his bed by the door. Outside, the cicadas had started their evening chorus. Everything sounded exactly the same, but nothing felt the same. Daniel was preparing legal documents designed to protect his assets from my daughter, and he had not told her. I did not call Grace. I did not call Daniel. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The smell hit me first. Cedar and old wool and something faintly sweet that I always associated with Helen's perfume, even though it had faded years ago. Inside were my medals, my commission papers, a photograph of Helen and me at my 4th star promotion ceremony. She was wearing a navy blue dress. I was in full uniform. We looked like two people who had walked through fire together and come out holding hands. I thought about what Helen would say. She would say, "Thomas, let the truth do the work." That is exactly what I decided to do. Before I continue, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are watching from. I read every single one of them. Knowing that you are out there listening keeps these stories alive. I called my old friend, Colonel Martin Hayes. Retired now, living in Fairfax. We served together for 19 years. Martin answered on the second ring. "Thomas, how are you? I need counsel." He paused. "The old kind or the new kind?" "The old kind. We sat at his kitchen table that Saturday. His wife Clara brought us coffee and then quietly closed the door." Martin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. The chair creaked. "So the boy does not know who you are?" "No. And he is building a legal wall around his money before the wedding." "That is what it sounds like. What do you want to happen?" "I want my daughter to see the truth before she signs anything." Martin smiled for the first time that morning. "Then you do not need a lawyer, Thomas. You need a dinner table." The invitation came 3 weeks later. Daniel's parents were hosting a gathering at their home, a pre-wedding celebration. Both families together for the first time. Daniel called me personally. "Thomas, I really want you there." "It means a lot to Grace. I would not miss it." He sounded pleased. "It will be casual, just family. No need to dress up." I smiled at that. He was already telling me what to wear. That Saturday evening, I deliberately chose my oldest sport coat, brown corduroy, elbow patches that Helen had sewn on 15 years earlier. I wore my military field watch, the one Helen gave me when I pinned on my 1st star, scratched crystal, faded dial. I drove the Chevrolet. The drive took me from Hadley's gravel shoulders into a neighborhood where every driveway held cars that cost more than a year of most people's wages. Daniel's parents lived in a stone front colonial at the end of a curved street. Beautiful home. Nothing excessive, just unmistakably expensive. Grace met me at the door. She hugged me tightly. I could smell lavender in her hair. "You came." "Of course I came." She pulled back and studied my coat. "Dad." She smiled. "I love that coat." "So did your mother." Daniel appeared behind her. "Thomas, welcome." He shook my hand. His grip was confident, practiced. His eyes moved briefly to my coat, then to my truck parked behind his mother's sedan. "I see you brought the classic." I smiled. "She starts every time." He laughed. "I will give her that." Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted lamb and something sweet baking in the oven. Daniel's mother, Victoria, greeted me with a polite embrace. His father, a man named Charles, shook my hand with a grip that lingered 1 second longer than expected. His eyes stayed on my face, not my clothes, not my watch, just my face. That detail mattered more than he knew. Dinner was elegant. Conversation moved through the usual territories. Market conditions, travel plans, wine recommendations. I listened more than I spoke. I always did. Eventually, Daniel mentioned a colleague who had recently been laid off. He shook his head. 47 years old and no savings. At some point, personal responsibility has to enter the conversation. Victoria nodded. People should plan ahead. Daniel glanced toward me. Retirement is especially tricky on a government pension. I imagine you know that better than most, Thomas. Grace shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The room waited. I calmly cut another piece of lamb. Planning is everything. Daniel smiled, assuming agreement. His mother looked at me sympathetically. It must be difficult adjusting after so many years of service. I smiled back. You adjust, or you do not. Either way, the sun comes up. Charles said nothing, but he was watching me the way a man watches someone he suspects knows more than he is showing. Dessert arrived, coffee followed. The conversation softened into the kind of comfortable quiet that usually signals the end of an evening. Then Charles stood. He walked to the sideboard. He opened a drawer and removed a thick white envelope. He carried it back to the table and placed it directly in front of me. The paper made a sound against the wood that seemed louder than it should have. I believe we should discuss terms, he said. No one breathed. Victoria set down her wine glass. Daniel leaned forward. Grace looked at me, her eyes searching for something I had not yet given her permission to find. I picked up the envelope. My name was not on it. Neither was Grace's. Across the front, printed in clean black letters, was a single word: agreement. I opened it slowly. Inside were 14 pages of legal language prepared by the firm of Harrison Burke and Associates, the same firm that had called Grace's phone. The first section outlined Daniel's assets, his commercial real estate portfolio, his brokerage accounts, his retirement funds, his equity stake in 3 development projects, his vacation property in Hilton Head. The numbers were substantial. The second section described Grace's financial position. Current savings approximately $62,000. No significant property. No trust documents on file. Expected inheritance unknown but presumed minimal based on father's observed lifestyle. I read that line twice. Not because it surprised me, because it confirmed exactly what I had suspected. Someone had drawn conclusions about my daughter based entirely on how I looked, how I lived, and what I drove. The document was not about protection. It was about assumption. Daniel spoke first. I know it looks formal, but my attorney says every couple should have one. Grace's face had gone pale. You told me we would discuss this together. We are discussing it. She looked at me. Dad, I did not know about this. I believe you. Daniel's voice remained steady. Thomas, I hope you understand. This is standard practice. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. Then I set the envelope on the table between my coffee cup and the dessert plate. I said nothing for a long time, long enough for the clock on the mantel to tick 14 times. I counted. I understand completely, I said. Daniel relaxed visibly. His mother smiled. Charles did not move. He was still watching me. There was something in his expression that told me he already knew this evening was far from over. I reached into the inside pocket of my sport coat. I removed a thin leather portfolio, old, worn at the edges. Helen had given it to me the year I was promoted to Brigadier General. She told me to keep the things that mattered most inside it. Not money, not contracts, documents that told the truth about who I was. I laid it on the table beside the envelope. Grace looked at it curiously. I have never seen that before. You have never needed to. I opened the portfolio. The first item I removed was my retired military identification card. Blue, laminated, slightly bent at one corner from years in my breast pocket. I slid it across the table toward Daniel. He picked it up casually. He read my name. He read the branch of service. Then his eyes reached the line that listed my rank. His face changed. The color left his cheeks in a way that reminded me of watching a tide pull back from shore. He looked at me. He looked at the card. He looked at me again. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Victoria reached for the card. She adjusted her glasses. Her hands stopped moving. She whispered one word, "Oh." Grace leaned closer. She read the card. Then she covered her mouth with both hands. Dad. She could not finish. I smiled gently. I waited. Daniel finally managed to speak. You are a general. I was. 4 stars. He shook his head slowly. That is not possible. I did not argue with him. I simply waited for the information to find its footing inside his mind. His mother looked toward Victoria. Did you know? Victoria shook her head, still staring at the card. Charles spoke quietly from the end of the table. I suspected. Every head turned toward him. His father continued. The posture, the discipline, the way he answered questions without ever revealing more than he chose to. He looked at me with something that resembled respect earned rather than respect performed. I asked you on the porch earlier what branch you served in. You said Army. I did. I asked how long. You said long enough. I smiled. That is usually my answer. Charles nodded. It told me everything I needed to know. Daniel was still holding the card. His hands had developed a slight tremor. I reached back into the portfolio. There is more. I removed 3 folded pages. Trust summaries. I created these after Helen passed, I said. Grace took them first. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to something I can only describe as rearrangement. Dad, she whispered, the house. It has been in your name for 4 years. She looked up. The cabin in Montana, also yours. The investment accounts. She stopped reading. Her hands were trembling. How much? Enough, I said. She stared at me. I did not want my rank or my money sitting at the dinner table every time we shared a meal. I wanted you to know me as your father, not as a general, just as the man who makes you breakfast and throws the ball for Chester. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I had no idea. I know. Why did you never tell me? Because Helen taught me something I have never forgotten. She told me that the only people who need to tell you what they are worth have not figured out what they are worth yet. The room went completely still. Daniel set the identification card down on the table with exaggerated care as though it might shatter. He looked at the prenuptial agreement. Then he looked at the trust documents. The contrast between the 2 stacks of paper told a story that no attorney could have drafted. His document had assumed my daughter was entering the marriage with almost nothing. The truth was she was entering it with more financial security than he had probably imagined possible. But I was not finished. I picked up the prenuptial agreement. I turned to the page that described Grace's financial position. I read the line aloud. Expected inheritance unknown but presumed minimal based on father's observed lifestyle. I set the page down. I looked directly at Daniel. I am not offended by this document. His eyes widened slightly. You are not. No. I am troubled by the assumption that created it. He opened his mouth, but nothing emerged. Someone looked at my truck, my coat, my house, and my neighborhood and decided they understood my daughter's future. I paused. That is not due diligence. That is prejudice dressed in legal language. Victoria looked at her coffee cup. Charles stood slowly from his chair. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard for a long time. When he turned back, his voice carried a weight that silenced everything else. I asked the attorney to prepare that agreement. Daniel looked at him. I know, Dad. No. Charles shook his head. You do not know why. The room tightened. I did not prepare it to protect our assets from Grace. He looked at his son with an expression that combined love and disappointment in equal measure. I prepared it because I wanted to see how you would present it, whether you would treat it as a partnership or a verdict. Daniel's jaw tightened. And I prepared it, Charles continued, because I have watched you change over the past 3 years. The confidence that used to make me proud has become something else. He paused. Something I do not recognize. Dad, you stopped visiting your aunt in the nursing home because you said it depressed you. Silence. You told your cousin his wedding was embarrassing because the venue served buffet food. More silence. And tonight, Charles glanced toward my old coat hanging by the front door. You seated a man at our table and assumed you already knew his story because of what he was wearing. Daniel stared at the floor. I did not plan this, Charles said. But I am not sorry it happened. Grace quietly reached for my hand. She held it tightly. With her other hand, she wiped her eyes. I have been trying to tell him, she said softly. Her voice cracked slightly. For months, he never listened. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? The server at the restaurant, the one who spilled the appetizer. Grace's voice steadied. I went back the next day and apologized on your behalf. She told me an older gentleman had already taken care of it. Grace looked at me. That was you. I nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment. Of course it was. Daniel sat motionless. The arrogance that had carried him through the evening had evaporated. What remained was something raw, something that looked like the beginning of honesty. He spoke quietly. I have spent 3 years assuming I was the most successful person in this relationship. He looked at me. I built a business. I closed deals. And the whole time, I was sitting across from a 4-star general who chose to live in a small house and drive an old truck and never once corrected me. Because you did not need to. No, I did not. He reached for the prenuptial agreement. He picked it up, then set it face down on the table. I do not want Grace signing this. Victoria looked surprised, but Daniel shook his head. I want a document that reflects the truth, not the story I was telling myself. Charles placed his hand on his son's shoulder. That is the first thing you have said tonight that sounds like the man I raised. The candles had burned low. The lamb had gone cold. But something warm had entered the room, something that had nothing to do with food or fire. Grace squeezed my hand once more before letting go. She stood and walked to Daniel. She did not say anything. She simply placed her hand on his cheek. He closed his eyes. One tear fell, then another. She whispered something I could not hear, but I saw his shoulders release. I saw him exhale, and I saw, for the first time since I had met him, a man who was no longer performing. That was the night something broke open, not broken apart. Broken open. There is a difference. Spring arrived slowly that year. The dogwoods bloomed late. The mornings carried a chill well into April. The wedding was postponed by 3 months, not because anyone demanded it, because Daniel asked for time. I want to earn this, he told Grace. She agreed. During those months, I watched a different man begin to emerge. Not overnight, never overnight. Real transformation is slow and full of setbacks that nobody talks about. Daniel started visiting me in Hadley on Saturday mornings. The first time he brought coffee from the gas station and a bag of donuts. We sat on the porch and said very little. Chester laid between us. The second visit, Daniel asked if I would teach him to sharpen a blade on my old whetstone. We spent 2 hours in the garage. The sound of steel against stone filled the silence between us. He was not good at it. He nicked his thumb. I handed him a bandage and said nothing. The third visit, he brought something unexpected. A framed photograph of his grandmother, the one who made peach cobbler. He set it on my mantel beside Helen's photograph. I thought they should meet, he said. My throat tightened. I turned away so he would not see my eyes. He also changed in smaller ways. He called the restaurant where Sophie worked. He asked to speak with her directly. He apologized, not for the spilled appetizer, for the way he had made her feel. Sophie told Grace about it later. She said he stayed on the phone for 12 minutes. He also began volunteering at the Veterans Center in Fairfax with me once a month. The first visit was awkward. He did not know what to say to men who had lived through things he could not imagine. You do not have to say anything, I told him. Just listen. So he did. He listened to a young sergeant who had lost both legs and talked about learning to dance again at his daughter's wedding. Driving home afterward, Daniel was quiet for 20 minutes. Then he said, I spent years measuring people by what they had built. He looked out the window at the passing trees. I never once asked what they had survived. 3 months after that first dinner, Daniel and Grace came to Hadley together. They brought groceries. Grace cooked Helen's fried chicken recipe. Daniel set the table. He used the old silverware without comment. After dinner, he reached into his jacket and handed me an envelope. I raised an eyebrow. Another envelope. He laughed. I deserve that. Inside was the original prenuptial agreement. Every page had been stamped with a single word in red ink: void. We had a new agreement drafted, Grace said. She handed me a second document. This one was different. Equal terms, mutual protection, shared planning. And at the bottom, a clause neither of them was required to include: a charitable trust to be funded annually for military families in transition. Named after Helen, I set the papers down. I looked at the kitchen window where the morning light was catching the glass, just the way it did when Helen used to stand there washing dishes and humming songs she never finished. Helen would have loved this, I said quietly. She would have loved every word of it. The wedding arrived on a clear Saturday in late June. Grace chose a small white chapel outside Hadley that Helen had always admired. Wildflowers lined the path to the door. Neighbors filled the pews alongside Daniel's business partners and veterans from my old unit. No one cared who earned more money. That morning, I reached for my suit. Then I paused. Hanging beside it was the old brown corduroy coat. I ran my fingers along the elbow patches Helen had sewn. I slipped it over my arm before leaving. Not because I needed it, because it reminded me of her. And it reminded me that the truest things about a person are almost never the things you can see. When I arrived at the chapel, Daniel was standing outside. He walked toward me before I reached the steps. He did not shake my hand. He wrapped me in a hug, a real one, not formal, not practiced, family. He stepped back. I almost forgot. He pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was my old military field watch, the scratched crystal, the faded numbers, but the movement had been professionally serviced. It keeps perfect time now, he said. I looked at it. It always did. He smiled. I know, but now it is ready for another mission. I placed the watch on my wrist. The leather band was warm against my skin. Thank you. He shook his head. No. His eyes glistened. Thank you, Dad. Just before the ceremony began, he leaned closer. I respected your rank the night I found out who you were. He paused. But I have spent these last 3 months learning to respect the man who never needed anyone to know. I placed my hand on his shoulder. That is the only rank that matters now. People sometimes ask me whether that dinner changed our family. I think they are asking the wrong question. The dinner did not change us. It revealed us. It revealed my daughter's patience. It revealed a father's quiet grief and hidden strength. It revealed a young man's pride and, thankfully, his willingness to surrender it. When I was young, I believed strength meant never showing weakness. War taught me that strength meant carrying weakness without letting it slow you down. But aging taught me the real truth. Strength is knowing exactly who you are and never needing a single other person to confirm it. Helen knew that before I did. She always was the smarter one. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone who loved you in ways you never fully saw, I hope you will share it with them. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Sometimes the people who need these words the most find them because someone like you decided to pass them along. That is how quiet kindness works. It travels through hands that never expect anything in return.